discretion advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
On the 22nd of April, 1974, 6 men drove to a home audio shop in Utah. They planned on robbing the store, taking hostages, and killing anybody who they encountered inside. At the time the men arrived, the store was just about to close, and there were only 2 employees inside, 18-year-old Michelle Ansley and 20-year-old Stanley Walker. 2 of the assailants remained outside with the 2 vans they'd driven to the scene, while the other 4 men entered the store with their handguns drawn. They quickly threatened and overpowered Michelle and Stanley, walked them down into the basement, and restrained them before walking back upstairs and beginning to rob the store. A short time later, another person came to the store. He was a 16-year-old boy named Courtney Naisbitt, and he wanted to thank Stanley for letting him use the parking lot while he was running errands earlier. As soon as Courtney walked through the door, he became another hostage in the basement. That evening, Stanley's father, Orrin Walker, arrived at the store, concerned that his son had never come home from his shift. Once again, Orrin was taken hostage. The same thing happened to Courtney's mother, Carol, who came to see if her son was still at the store. By this point, the 6 assailants were now managing a total of 5 hostages. One of the men left to get something from one of the vans outside, and came back with an empty bottle hidden in a paper bag, which they poured drain cleaner into. They told Orrin Walker to force the other hostages to drink the drain cleaner, but when he wouldn't, he was tied up and gagged and left lying on his stomach. Then the 2 perpetrators sat up the rest of the hostages and attempted to make them drink the liquid by lying and saying that it was a mix of alcohol and sleeping medication. They mistakenly believed that the drain cleaner would be a quick and easy way to kill the hostages. Instead, it tortured them. As soon as the liquid touched the mouths of the victims, it caused burns to their tongues and made their lips blister and peel. Orrin was the last person to be forced to drink the poison, but he had seen the damage the liquid had caused to the other hostages and didn't believe it was vodka. He pretended to drink from the bottle but did not swallow, and then forced himself to scream and convulse like the others. One of the perpetrators, a 21-year-old man named Dale Pierre, was frustrated that the victims weren't instantly dying. With his handgun, he shot both Courtney and Carol in the head. Carol was killed instantly, but Courtney survived the wound. Dale then tried to shoot Orrin and missed, so he fatally shot Stanley before trying to shoot Orrin again. This time, the bullet made contact, but it was only a flesh wound. Believing that the rest of the hostages were dead, Dale then sexually assaulted 18-year-old Michelle. After the assault, he let her get up and use the toilet before throwing her to the ground and fatally shooting her. Michelle Ansley's last words were, "I'm too young to die." At this point, the perpetrators finally noticed that they had not succeeded in killing Orrin. Dale climbed up on top of him and tried to strangle him with the length of wire, but it didn't work. Then they placed an ink pen inside of his ear canal and stomped on his head, causing the pen to puncture his eardrum. Believing that Orrin had finally died, the men loaded up their van and fled the scene. 3 hours later, Orrin's family came to the store, concerned after both Stanley and Orrin failed to come home. They found the store in disarray, and when Orrin's son heard strange noises coming from the basement, he broke into the store through the back door, while his mother called 911. First responders found that 2 of the victims, Ansley and Stanley, were dead at the scene and unable to be revived. Carol was rushed to a nearby hospital but was dead on arrival. Due to the extent of Courtney Naisbitt's injuries, he was expected to die, but despite his severe brain damage, he clung to life. After almost a year of intensive treatment in the hospital, he was released, although he would suffer from his brain injuries for the rest of his life. Despite Orrin Walker being poisoned, shot, strangled, and stabbed with a pin through his eardrum, he was alive and lucid. While he had serious chemical burns to his face from the drain cleaner and a damaged eardrum, he was able to describe the assailants to the authorities. Only hours after the murders were reported on the news, the police received a phone call from a concerned man who was in the Air Force. He told them that he remembered a concerning conversation with an Air Force helicopter mechanic, 19-year-old William Andrews, who had told him, quote, "One of these days, I'm going to rob that hi-fi shop, and if anybody gets in the way, I'm going to kill them." Only a couple hours later, the connection between the crime and the Air Force was strengthened. A couple of kids had been dumpster diving at the nearby Air Force base when they had found several wallets containing the driver's licenses of the victims. The detective who arrived at the dumpsters found that a crowd had gathered, and believing that the killers were connected to the Air Force, he thought there was a good chance that they could be in the crowd. He decided to try to scare the killers by putting on a dramatic show. He used tongs to remove the evidence from the dumpster. Sure enough, he noticed that two of the men in the crowd were acting suspiciously. While everybody else was silently watching as he retrieved the evidence, two men were engaged in a loud conversation while anxiously waving their hands around. Those two men were Dale Pierre, the man who shot Orrin had described to the cops, and William Andrews, who had told a friend he was going to rob the store one day. Both Dale and William were questioned while officers worked to obtain a search warrant for their barracks rooms. Inside, investigators found several flyers for the store that they had targeted, as well as a contract for a storage unit. After getting a second search warrant for the storage unit, they found several pieces of equipment that had been stolen from the hi-fi store, as well as a bottle of drain cleaner that had been used to poison the hostages. Now, the police had 2 of the 4 perpetrators, and the hunt for the remaining men continued. After a few weeks, a third man was identified after questioning. He was 19-year-old Keith Roberts, who was also an airman, but although he admitted to being an accomplice in the robbery, he claimed that he'd waited outside in the van the whole time and had no idea about the horrors that Dale and William were committing inside the store. All 3 perpetrators were charged with aggravated robbery and first-degree murder, and a date was set for a joint trial. Both Dale Pierre and William Andrews were found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death. However, Keith was only found guilty of the robbery and acquitted of the murder. During the trial, the jury learned that Dale and William had agreed that they would rob the store and kill everyone inside. They'd even spent time researching how to quickly and easily kill people. The use of drain cleaner had been inspired by a 1983 film called Magnum Force, where a sex worker was forced to drink drain cleaner and then died immediately. The 2 men had watched the film together several times, and without any further research, they decided that the drain cleaner would be the perfect way to instantly take care of their victims. Before their executions, both Dale and William were viewed as the scum of the earth by the other prisoners, especially on death row. In 1977, another murderer even addressed them using his last words before he was killed by a firing squad, calling out, quote, "I'll see you in hell," as he walked past their cells. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Dale, William, and Keith, there was never enough evidence to convict the remaining 3 assailants, who remain unnamed to this day. 3 of the people in the hi-fi store that day died tragic, painful deaths, and 3 of the people who contributed to their deaths walked free. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe. I'm the host, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my podcast today. If you're on to the next one, keep right on cooking. Don't let me stop you by rambling on here for a moment. But if you're a brand new listener to 10-Minute Murder, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Chances are it's where you're listening right now. It may not be. I know I personally jump around between 2 or 3 different places to listen to podcasts, so you may not be married to one. That's cool. Just wherever you like to listen, subscribe on all of those so that you can always find the show quickly and easily. If you like this episode, if you enjoy this podcast in general, make sure you leave feedback. A rating and review anywhere that's possible helps this show grow so much. For all things related to 10-Minute Murder, you can go to my website, 10minutemurder.com. Quick email question for today. Hey Joe, OG listener. I remember you did an episode on the Blue Moon murders. What is your favorite beer? Is it Blue Moon? Thanks for all you do with your podcast. Best true crime podcast, hands down. Trevor from Colorado. And Trevor is an OG listener. And Trevor's been around since close to the beginning. And there are thousands and thousands of people that listen to this podcast. But I promise you, people like Trevor that I see that are consistent in sharing the podcast and consistent in, checking out the content that I take the time to produce. I noticed that. I've noticed Trevor for a long time. And Trevor, I appreciate it, buddy. But yeah, Blue Moon, I really do like it. It's not my favorite. I do drink it pretty often, but my favorite beer is made by a brewery that's a hard word to say, by the way, brewery. It's made by a brewery in Louisiana called Abita, and it's Purple Haze. That's my favorite beer. Blue Moon is a close second, probably, but Purple Haze is definitely my favorite one. Thank you for listening to another 10-Minute Murder podcast episode. I will see you on the next one. Goodbye.